A war of words between Donald Trump and Michael Cohen as the one-time fixer gets a 3-year prison term, and many pundits accuse the president of masterminding a hush money scheme.
Let me tell you, I never directed him to do anything wrong. Whatever he did on his own. He's a lawyer.
He was trying to hide what you were doing, correct?
Correct.
And he knew it was wrong?
Of course.
Today, implicated by a federal judge who has a finding of fact agreed that Donald Trump directed Michael Cohen to commit federal crimes and that Michael Cohen committed those crimes in coordination with Donald Trump.
There's no question that if Michael Cohen weren't connected to the President of the United States, he would not be in this situation today.
For the sake of debate, let's say that it did happen. Why would sending money to women be considered a crime?
Trump bears responsibility for employing Cohen. That's not against the law to employ a bad lawyer who then might have done something wrong. Cohen pleading guilty is not the same as Trump pleading guilty.
But with all this tabloid tawdriness, whatever happened to the media's focus on supposed Russian collusion? And what about the National Enquirer getting immunity after its executives admitted helping the Trump campaign buy the silence of a former Playboy playmate? The president threatens a government shutdown in an extraordinary televised confrontation with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and the pundits say he got trumped.
Okay, absolutely. And I am proud, and I'll tell you what, I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck.
Just objectively speaking, I was like, oh my gosh, Nancy Pelosi is a boss.
He pulls the veil back, allowing the American people to see just how unreasonable and how petty the Democrats have become.
But is this really about closing the government or just theater as each side plays to its base? Plus, no, don't feel sorry for us, but as I first reported, Donald Trump has canceled the White House holiday party for the press. Do today's journalists deserve to be disinvited? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is MediaBuzz. Michael Cohen has been dominating the headlines, not just because he got a 36-month prison sentence, but because he says he was doing Donald Trump's bidding in arranging 6-figure payments to 2 women who say they once had affairs with the president. Trump disparaged the case with Fox's Harris Faulkner.
Why did you hire Michael Cohen? He was known as a fixer.
I'll tell you what, first of all.
That was his title, a
very
fixer.
low level. You know what? In retrospect, I made a mistake. Because what he did was all unrelated to me, except for the 2 campaign finance charges that are not criminal and shouldn't have been on there. They put that on to embarrass me.
But Cohen returned fire with ABC's George Stephanopoulos, saying his ex-boss ordered the payments to Stormy Daniel and Karen McDougal with the help of Trump pal and National Enquirer boss David Pecker.
He directed me to make the payments. He directed me to become involved in these matters, including the one with McDougal, which was really between him and David Pecker, and then David Pecker's counsel. I just reviewed the documents in order to protect him. I gave loyalty to someone who truthfully does not deserve loyalty.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Emily Jashinsky, culture editor at The Federalist. Susan Faricio, chief congressional correspondent for The Washington Examiner. And Capri Cafaro, former Democratic Senate leader in Ohio who teaches at American University. Emily, are the media embracing Michael Cohen, convicted felon, as a truth teller because he is now implicating Donald Trump?
So there are very legitimate questions to be asked of Michael Cohen, the president's longtime fixer. Obviously, he has some very valuable information over the course of a decade over the presidential election. That is fair to ask those questions of him. But I don't understand why everybody is not taking what this man says with a massive grain of salt, given that he had previously said he would take a bullet for Donald Trump.
We know he did not. It's called flipping, Emily.
Right,
he has flipped. Let me go to Susan. How did George Stephanopoulos, who's been Cohen's go-to guy, handle that interview, and how did Michael Cohen come off?
I thought the interview was full of leading questions set up to implicate President Trump. I don't feel he asked him any hard-hitting questions.
He asked a few, like, why should we believe you now?
He did, but most of it were leading questions about, wasn't this all a setup by the president? You know, it did not feel like a hard-hitting interview to me. It felt like a slam dunk for Cohen to trash the president.
Capri, how does the press grapple with the criticism raised by White House spokesman Hogan Gidley, who said for the media to give credence to a convicted criminal who has lied on multiple occasions and admitted doing just that is laughable?
Look, I mean, I think you have to, there's obviously, as Emily was saying, there are issues here and there are questions that need to be asked about the veracity of someone who has admitted they are liars. But I think that we also need to remember that, for example, there's a lot of love for other folks that have pled guilty in the White House, like Paul Manafort, for example. So, I mean,
love on the president's part, you mean?
That's right. So, I mean, I think that there's you know, for Hogan to say that, I think that there are some questions there.
Now, the president tweeting just this morning that Michael Cohen became a rat, that's the technical term, I suppose, after the FBI did this unthinkable thing of breaking into his office. For the record, the FBI had a legal search warrant for that entry. Emily, this is not a pro-Trump question or an anti-Trump question. I'm trying to give you a factual question. The president has shifted his denials. First, he knew nothing about the hush money payments. We've all seen that tape. Then he admitted reimbursing the $130K for Stormy Daniels. Now it's, I knew about the payments, but they were illegal, and my lawyer handled it, and even if it is a campaign finance violation, that's a civil matter, usually punishable by a fine. Have those shifting stories eroded the president's credibility with the mainstream media?
Well, I think that's been sloppy. That's just been a messy defense. There's no way around that. So I think for some legitimate reasons, the credibility has been eroded on this particular question. I will say there is a serious conversation about whether this is a legitimate campaign finance violation that I only saw in conservative news outlets this week. That may be true, it may not be, but at least the conversation should be more widespread, and the mainstream media should be asking questions about that as well.
More broadly, Capri, the media already, much of the media, I would say, already convicting President Trump. You got all these ex-prosecutors, there were just dozens and dozens on the other channels saying he helped Cohen commit a felony. He could be indicted if he wasn't president. He could be indicted anyway. He could be impeached. Is this an overreaction given where we are in the investigation?
I think what frustrates me the most about this issue and the coverage of this issue is that there's really no investigative journalism that is engaging this. You have two camps going on. You have a group of people that are basically saying they're convicting Trump by association, you know, with Michael Cohen, who has pled guilty, or you have the other camp essentially saying that, you know, Cohen's a liar and Trump's being railroaded. We're not having legitimate, substantive conversations about this because the media has decided to just, you know, decide on their own, have camps, and
I disagree partially. I think some of the facts that have come out later confirmed in the investigation, and it depends on whether you believe Cohen or not, have been brought out by aggressive reporting. The Wall Street Journal broke the story about Stormy Daniels days before the 2016 election. But what you're saying is that the
coverage, particularly
the coloration is so the coverage is so partisan that it colors it. Do you agree with that?
I think so, yes, and I think there needs to be more. Part of the problem is campaign finance law is murky, hard to write about. People's eyes glaze over. Reporters don't want to get into the weeds.
But that's a legal argument. Let me ask you this broader question, Susan. I'm not minimizing the importance of this case brought by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, not Mueller's office, by the way. The media spent the last year and a half talking about Russian collusion, possible Russian collusion, Moscow and all of that. And now it seems at the moment to be sort of, never mind, it's about paying off a couple of
Well, there's some vague connection. Don't forget Cohen also was cooperating with Mueller about the dates of contacting the Russians about building property there.
Yeah, I understand.
So that's important. So they're kind of clinging to that. So the media is holding on to that, saying there's still collusion here, there's still collusion here. But they're also, if you look at the language in these media reports, it's now expanded to other problems that Trump has. So they're just kind of fishing around, looking for even more. And it reminds me.
It's more like it's creating a pattern.
I don't know if it reminds you of this, but of the Clinton administration, the Whitewater investigation just dragged through his whole presidency. It became just an expansion, an investigation to find any crime here or there.
Investigations have a way of morphing, and there are multiple investigations. The question for the press is this: as unsavory as all this is about the women, for a president to be involved in payments to women, does the underlying problem, allegedly suppressing stories about sex, does that rise to the level, there are echoes of Bill Clinton in this, of theoretically indicting or impeaching a president?
I would say it is greatly disappointing to me, and the more we learn about it, the more disappointing it is. I think it's not appropriate behavior, it's not acceptable behavior. But no, I don't think it hits that standard, and I don't think the American people will buy that it hits that standard. And so you can make the argument in Congress all you want, and I expect House Democrats, I expect Senate Democrats to do it, and I think it will be a mistake if they push it too hard.
Many in the press are doing that as well. And the same question to you, Capri. And by the way, Rudy Giuliani told the Daily Beast about these payments. Nobody got killed. Nobody got robbed. It's not a big crime. Now, he did walk that back with the Daily Beast, and today he was with Chris Wallace and he said it was out of context. He also called Cohen a complete pathological liar. But is the essence of the argument here is just not that big a deal?
Well, remember the old bumper stickers you mentioned? Clinton lied, nobody died. There was that.
So they're
maybe
royalty payments.
Maybe there's a resurgence here. Yeah. But I tend again to agree with Emily on this. And as a Democrat, I would just say that Democrats in the House and the Senate would make a very big mistake to try to pursue impeachment, because I do think the American public does not see this.
Isn't it the press that is, if not pursuing impeachment,
insinuating,
making the case, or insinuating, or suggesting, or that either indictment or impeachment is the proper remedy here?
I think that the media is trying to basically create a pattern of conduct, and they're trying to convict the president as such. I mean, I think that is clear in certain media outlets.
By the way, after Kellyanne Conway was on with CNN's Chris Cuomo, minutes after that, her husband, George Conway, an accomplished lawyer who's been tweeting about this, was tweeted that Trump's repeatedly lied about these payments. He lies about everything, and that got a lot of attention.
You know what was really interesting this week, too, that a lot of people did not pay any attention to, was an exchange between the incoming House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, and the press at her weekly press conference, where they started asking her, again, the litany of questions about impeachment. And she immediately said, you know what, maybe you would have more readers, maybe your ratings would improve if you asked about something other than Donald Trump's legal problems. Every single week, this is all we talk about. Let's talk about other issues that Americans care about. It was an astonishing moment, really.
Right. So in a way, she agrees with the White House critique that did not enough focus on substance. It's all about investigations, allegations, and that may block the Democrats from getting their message out. And so finally, I mentioned the president's been tweeting this morning. We go through this every Sunday. Let's put it up on the screen. A real scandal, he says, is the one-sided coverage, hour by hour, of networks like NBC and Democrats' spin machines like Saturday Night Live. He goes on to say, should be tested in courts, can't be legal, only defame and belittle. Collusion. I get that he's increasingly frustrated by both the coverage and by Alec Baldwin.
Yeah.
But suggesting it's not legal and maybe should be reviewed by the courts, troubling?
I never like it when he gets into this, and he's only asked questions, to be fair. He's never really seriously pursued anything. He mostly just asked the questions.
That's like saying,
about whether government
should they be hung? Question mark.
Right, yeah. Well, he asked these questions about whether government should regulate the press or whether government should regulate corporations, Silicon Valley, whatever it is. I never like it. I always think it's going against, conservatism. It's going against my instincts as a conservative, and I don't think it's appropriate behavior from the president. But I mean, some of these tweets.
Well, there's also an entertainment. Just briefly,
Yes.
I mean, you have a remedy under our system. You can file a libel suit, not practical for a president.
Not practical
but
for a
here he is saying collusion, legal question.
Well, this is exactly what he's unfortunately playing into the media's hand, into the left's hand, by basically saying, look, they'll point to this tweet and they'll say, see, President Trump wants to silence the press. He wants to silence the First Amendment, and he wants to present himself as the king of America.
He's not wrong, though, by the way, about SNL becoming a Democratic spin machine. I want to put that out there.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that another time. Great discussion. Let me get a break ahead. The pundits say Nancy and Chuck outfoxed Donald in that televised meeting. Are they missing the bigger picture? But when we come back, Melania Trump, in a rare interview, blames media opportunists for distorting her image. Does she have a case? Melania Trump only rarely does interviews, but she made some news with Sean Hannity by taking on her critics.
What's been the hardest thing that you have to deal with?
I would say the opportunists who are using my name or my family name to advance themselves, from comedians to journalists to performers, book writers.
Does it hurt?
It doesn't hurt. The problem is they writing the history, and it's not correct.
Emily, Melania Trump, in my view, is covered differently than almost any other first lady. Does she have a point that those she calls media opportunists are peddling bogus stuff about her?
Oh, yeah. I mean, she is subject to a lot of really, I think, shameful coverage. And it's unfortunate. I think that whole interview, when you watch the full interview, which I didn't get to do until I was researching for the show this week, it was completely, I don't want to say misrepresented, but people pulled some of the moments that, I mean, she talks about when she met the president, she talks about what it's like for her to having come from her childhood to where she is now. It was actually a really good interview, and she sounds confident. She comes across very well. She deserves better coverage.
But Susan, those she calls opportunists, journalists, comedians, authors, Don't they weigh in on every president and first lady?
She has not received the kind of treatment of past first ladies by any stretch. Michelle Obama was on a magazine cover 12 times just during the Obama administration. In fact, she's on a couple this month.
Yeah.
Essence and Elle magazine,
Right.
I think.
Whereas Melania, a former
Never.
professional model.
Think back to last January 2017, standing in the aisle at the grocery store. Did you see any magazine covers with Melania or the Trumps? As normal treatment you see. That, at the outset, was the beginning of how we knew Melania was going to be treated. From everything that comes out of her mouth to just comparing her or just writing about her as an accomplice to the president, who the media has this very angry relationship with. And she is a victim of that as well.
Right. Now, by the way, CNN had a poll this week saying that her approval rating has gone down from 54 to 43%, but more people still like her than don't like her, which is not true of most politicians. I have a soundbite for you, Capri.
All right.
Another bite from the Hannity interview.
They like to focus on the gossip, and I would like to that they focus on the substance and what we do, not just about nonsense.
There's a lot of chatter in the press about her marriage. Why didn't she take this trip with the president? Why did she swat his hand away? And all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure that even though she says it doesn't hurt, I'm sure it bugs her.
She's human. She's human. And, you know, unfortunately, the press doesn't treat public officials or people in the public eye as human sometimes. You know, they analyze every single little movement and word that comes out of their mouth. I mean, I think that she has a point. I think that there are a lot of people, though not just her, that have been, you know, analyzed in that kind of manner.
Yeah. But what else came out of this interview that you noticed?
Well, what I noticed in the coverage of it, frankly,
Yeah.
was that people weren't necessarily talking about, from a media perspective, her visits, for example, with military families. It was all about her appearance. And one thing that I would also say is that people look at her, and when she does swat the president's hand, all of a sudden they like her because she stands up to the president. When she talks about the media being an opportunist, they don't like her anymore. So they were more fixated on the fact that she had blonde hair than anything else that came out of her mouth.
And on that point, I didn't realize what an explosion there was. I mean, all these headlines. USA Today, Melania's lighter hair shocks, causes Twitter uproar. New York Magazine, what does Melania's blonde hair mean?
Well, so
what does it mean?
Right, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Too. They say, well, why is she wearing this color to the State of the Union address, and why, you know, is it something? Is it a message to Trump?
Yes, and this is where the Melania Trump does. She's very well dressed, and I don't think she has any problem. I wouldn't have any problem with her clothing being the subject of news coverage or her hair being the subject of news coverage. It's putting her on the armchair and assuming that with her blonde hair, she's not just making a choice about what she's wearing or her fashion sense. She's conveying some sort of message rather than just being a woman who wanted to change her hair color.
Yeah, the press was mad when she wore high heels to a flood zone.
Right,
This is the
getting on the plane, not in the hurricane. Right.
That's the atmosphere.
But I think she should do more interviews. She is good at it, and because she is a private person and spends a lot of time being a mom and is not out there, and I think journalists resent that. They want fodder from the First Lady. Doesn't she also just leave a vacuum that is partially filled by her critics?
Well, I think she's done a whole bunch of interviews, and long interviews too. And you know what? Why should she do more interviews when the coverage is always going to be, I think, inherently unfair unless she criticizes her husband? She is actually in a really no-win situation. She gives a lot of interviews. They talk about her hair, her coat, her shoes. You know,
well, that's a fair point, the coverage of the interviews, but I do think it's a way to get the message. I'll let you agree with me in 10 seconds.
I agree with you. There you go.
Took only 5. Capri Cafaro, Susan Faricio. Emily, we'll see you later. Thanks very much. Ahead, the National Enquirer avoids prosecution with a plea deal. How badly is the supermarket tabloid damaged? But up next, the huge blow-up when I reported that the president had canceled the White House Christmas party for the press. There was a media eruption after I broke the story that President Trump had canceled the White House holiday party for the press. And everyone was choosing sides. On the left, Salon read a headline likening Trump to the Grinch. On the right, Breitbart said the president had dropped the soiree for the fake news media. And the story was picked up just about everywhere.
But sadly, John, some people aren't having a holly jolly Christmas. The White House press corps. Because Donald Trump has canceled the White House Christmas party for the press.
Now, some of you said on Twitter, there's no way Trump should invite to his home a bunch of vipers who've been so monstrously mean to him. This was hardly shocking news given the mutual animosity between this president and the press. It's a tradition that stretches back decades, and the great perk is that presidents and first ladies patiently pose for pictures with the journalists, and you can send those home to mom. I've gotten pictures and a chance to chat over the years with George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. Also, it's nice to be able to roam around the decorated mansion with your spouse or other relative or guest. And hey, the food is pretty good. Now, no one has to feel sorry for the journalists, the anchors, the commentators, and the media executives who will now be deprived of their crab claws and gingerbread cookies. But the parties were useful as a way of building relationships with top officials. At last year's party, the Trumps dropped in for a brief speech, didn't pose for pictures. I chatted with Chief of Staff John Kelly, and soon other reporters joined in, and we learned some things. And by the way, some media figures sympathetic to Trump, including some hosts at Fox News, have been included in other White House parties this season. Donald Trump has every right not to hold a press party with people he views as fundamentally unfair to him. I just think it's a bit disappointing that this toxic relationship has ended a bipartisan ritual that allowed both sides to converse for the briefest of moments as human beings. Ahead on MediaBuzz, the demise of the Weekly Standard. Is the conservative magazine folding because of its anti-Trump stance? But first, President Trump picks an acting chief of staff as the press portrays the whole process as chaotic. But is that true? Just as the media were declaring that nobody wanted the job of White House Chief of Staff, President Trump yesterday gave the job on an acting basis to his budget director, Mick Mulvaney, this after plenty of press speculation and mistakes. Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Jim Garrity, senior political correspondent for National Review, and Adrian Elrod, a Democratic strategist and former Hillary Clinton campaign aide. Jim, last Sunday morning as we sat here, the press said Nick Ayers was a done deal for Chief of Staff. He didn't take it. And reporters said Chris Christie was the leading candidate. An hour later, he dropped out. Now it's Mulvaney. Here's what the Washington Post said. Trump grew deeply frustrated at the rejections and the media narrative that no one of high stature wanted to be his chief of staff, according to a senior White House official. Fair, unfair, crazy?
Look, when you do have a couple of names that keep getting floated, it's very clear this president likes to have an almost apprentice-like setup, right? He likes to create this drama, the sense of who's going to be the next White House chief of staff, and to kind of get everybody leaning forward and excited to see who the next person's going to be.
I was very excited.
I mean, some of them are going to be more dramatic than others. Yeah. But there's been a lot of churn in this administration, and almost like you get this crazy idea that maybe this president's a little tough to work for, a little erratic, a little unsurprising you.
Well,
not always listening.
Tough to work for does seem fair. And by the way, it took the press about 9 seconds to dig up the fact that Mick Mulvaney in 2016 had called Donald Trump a terrible human being. But Adrian, HuffPost reported that Jared Kushner was under consideration for chief of staff. Reuters said other people were pushing him. The Washington Post said he wasn't under consideration at all. I was getting whiplash.
Look, I think in this case the coverage is fair because there's no question that President Trump was having a difficult time trying to find a chief of staff. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that oftentimes, or we've seen with not just chiefs of staff, but with other high-level members of the Trump administration, they come in with these stellar reputations. John Kelly, for example, four-star general, led the Southern Command for the United States of America. And then they come out of the administration and their reputations are in shambles or they're made fun of. And so I can understand why somebody, especially in the case of Nick Ayers, who has made it very clear he wants to have a future political career in his native state, would have some trepidations about becoming the chief of staff.
Right. On that point, I mean, that may be true in some cases. Ryan Zinke, the Interior Secretary, was forced out yesterday under a number of ethical allegations that he calls false. So let me go now to the Chuck and Nancy and Donald show, that extraordinary televised confrontation in the Oval Office about border funding for the wall. And, well, let's look at what the president said.
20 times you have called for, I will shut down the government if I don't get my wall. None of us have said.
You want to know something?
You've said it.
Okay, you want to put that on my...
You've said it.
I'll take it.
Okay, good.
You know what I'll say? Yes. If we don't get what we want, one way or the other, whether it's through you, through a military, through anything you want to call, I will shut down the government.
Okay,
absolutely.
fair enough.
Trump is in cloud cuckoo land about his own abilities as a television performer in these settings because he got outplayed completely by Pelosi and Schumer.
He was cutting them off. He was holding up pieces of paper. Nancy, Nancy, Nancy. Chuck's sitting there like a weakling. Nancy's getting interrupted the whole time.
I mean,
it was an extraordinary physical performance.
There's a deep divide here, but purely in television terms, those 17 minutes, the consensus in me was sort of that the two Democrats had the president on the defensive.
Yeah, you could probably argue by saying, look, Trump put out his red line, right? His idea of this is what I'm willing to fight for. This is what is so important to me. I'm willing to shut down the government over it, almost like a dare to the other side. You could argue that was one of his stronger moments. I also want to point out, though, like, Howard, it feels like this was like a year ago because it was one of the better moments for the president in this week, kind of overtaken by the Michael Cohen interview. interview, kind of overtaken by the chief of staff drama.
Plea, you mean, yeah.
Zinke. I mean, like, even when you have a good moment, I don't feel like this was in the news.
This happens every week. I come on and I say, by the way, this happened Tuesday, and everyone looks at me like it wasn't that last year, you know. But look, Donald Trump proudly said he would shut down the government to get the $5 billion in funding he wants for that border wall. The Democrats are offering about $1 billion. And even straight news stories pointed out, usually you try to pin the shutdown on the other guys.
Yeah, right. I mean, usually you don't want to be the one who declares outwardly in front of millions of people watching national television, I'm the one who will shut down the government for this.
And I won't blame you, he said.
And I won't blame you, exactly. But what I think we have to look at the broader picture here, Howie, and I think that is that this has become a reality show. There's a lot at stake here. This is a very important, there's a lot of policy at stake, a lot of important policies that have now become sort of, resorted to this reality television show.
What about the idea that it is
Trump.
valuable and refreshing to see political leaders debating substance while the cameras are rolling?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I would really call that a big substantive debate there. I mean, I think it was more like, I want $5 billion, you want $1 billion, give and take. But yeah, I guess perhaps it does expose the government a little bit more to the, it sort of like makes it a little bit more easy to understand.
Yeah, you could score Trump as having a win when Pelosi said, well, maybe when the cameras aren't here, we'll be able to make more progress. This suggestion of, quick, let's get behind closed doors again, that's where I'm comfortable.
Well, because it's hard to do a deal in front of the
having
guys.
said that, I mean, look, there was a time, we saw this on gun control, we saw this on the first budget fight. Trump loves these Oval Office, I'm going to argue in front of the cameras. Yeah. And there was a time that probably would have thrown off the Nancy Pelosi's and Chuck Schumer. We're now more than 2 years into this presidency. Right. This isn't all that new and surprising. This is more of the same. Yeah, they were ready.
And on that point, and the Democrats came out on the driveway, and then Democrats leaked to reporters that privately Nancy Pelosi had told her fellow Democrats, well, this is a manhood issue for Trump, and kind of mocking his manhood. That's a Trumpian tactic, underscoring your point. But look, leaving aside this moment that probably will fade into history, the president's happy because he broadcast to his base that he really cares about illegal immigration, as they do, that he will fight for this wall. He's willing to shut down because that's what the threat was all about. So from his point of view, it might have been a win.
Yeah, from his point of view, I think it is a win because if you're Trump, all you're trying to do is placate to your base. You're trying to show your base that you're there fighting for him. The problem here is that this is not expanding his base. It is literally just generating more excitement among his base, but he's not actually expanding it, which is what hurt him in the midterms and which is going to hurt him in 2020 unless he finds a way to actually bring in independents and swing voters.
Right. And by the way, this was all about the television moment because, and we've got this on videotape, there's not going to be a shutdown. Nobody wants a shutdown. Both parties, they all want to leave this town and go home for Christmas. I could be wrong, but I think in the end, they always sort of find some kind of compromise. And so that a lot of this can be kind of playing to the respective bases. Stick around, guys. We're going to come back after this break. Coming up, the National Enquirer avoids prosecution, but admits it tried to help Donald Trump cover up allegations by two women. How bad is the damage? And later, we'll look at Mika Brzezinski's unfortunate slur. While Michael Cohen will be spending time behind bars, prosecutors let the National Enquirer's parent company, AMI, off the legal hook after executives admitted having lied about a $150,000 payment to Karen McDougal, the former Playboy model. McDougal talked about that months ago with CNN.
You're saying AMI suddenly came back to you with interest in the story?
Well, to Keith, yes, to us for the story, yeah.
Why do you think it was that it was after Donald Trump was the Republican nominee that they came back?
They wanted to squash the story.
American Media Inc., headed by Trump's close pal David Pecker, had been telling reporters, including me, that it couldn't corroborate McDougal's account of a decade-old affair with Donald Trump and paid her for cover shots and fitness columns. Pecker and his firm, in exchange for immunity, now say they acted in concert with Trump's campaign to buy and bury McDougal's story. Jim, I'm told that AMI didn't take this all that seriously at first, then had to face reality, then got squeezed by the Southern District of New York, and ultimately made the plea that really saved the company, because the company could have been indicted. Mm-hmm. How much damage is there to David Pecker, to AMI, to the National Enquirer for admitting conspiring or working with the Trump campaign?
Okay, as of like a couple decades ago, you would have said very little because the National Enquirer was, you saw it on the supermarket checkout line. It was next to the magazines telling you that Elvis was a space alien, and I saw Jesus in my rutabaga, stuff like that. Yeah. But then they did the John Edwards story, and everyone kind of scoffed at it, and the John Edwards story turned out to be more or less accurate. So there was a little bit of, oh wait, maybe you got to take the National Enquirer a little more seriously. Maybe they do chase stories.
Yeah,
nobody
same thing
else
with Tiger Woods and a couple other stories.
I think you can now say, based on this, no, you should not put that much faith in what you see in the National Enquirer. It is actually anti-journalism. It's the one place you can go to where you a publication where we know you will not read stories if rich and powerful people decide to reach out and offer a check and say, no, we can't have this story out there. They are effectively for sale, and that's not really what journalism is.
Well, that sounds like it's for sale to anybody, but clearly the friendship between Donald Trump and David Pecker, I
for
get
sale to rich, powerful friends of the publisher.
Rolled his eyes. Okay, so it sounds funny to say a supermarket tabloid that practices checkbook journalism, but did, as Jim says, the John Edwards story about his campaign mistress and his love child, which ended up in an unsuccessful prosecution of the former presidential candidate. I take the Enquirer seriously in those kinds of stories. But can the Enquirer rebuild trust with its readers, or is it sort of tainted forever now?
I mean, I don't know what kind of trust the Enquirer ever really had with his readers. I guess there are some people who do believe that space aliens and, whatever else they put on their
But it beat the rest of the media on the Edwards story. He denied it for months.
But it did, and there have been a handful of stories that you just pointed out that the Enquirer has broken, and of course the John Edwards story was one of the most notorious and probably the most well-sourced story, which really kind of made you rethink, how do we consider the National Enquirer? Yeah. But look, I don't know. Again, I don't really know what trust they ever had with their viewers or with their readers. I'm sure that there were plenty of people who want to buy it because it's juicy and fun and it costs $1.50 or whatever.
Okay, fair enough. Let me move on. So the main media angle in this is that this implicates Trump because it's not just Michael Cohen saying these things about the hush money payments. It's his pals at the Enquirer. Who's saying, who are now, to save their own skins, are saying, yeah, he knew about and was involved in, he was in the room when we talked about Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels.
Yeah, I think it's very revealing that both with this, the Stormy Daniels argument, the defense is, look, this is not illegal. It looks terrible. It's extraordinarily unethical. You should not trust us as far as you can throw us, but it's not illegal. Possibly accurate. I'm not a prosecutor. I know different prosecutors will disagree on that. It is worth noting the jury did not come back with John Edwards, nailing him for when he used money from one of his wealthy donors. It wasn't his own money. It was a wealthy backer came along and said, okay, I'll take care of this. I'll throw money around to make sure the problem goes away. Couldn't get a prosecution, couldn't get a successful conviction.
Right,
on
now,
that.
look, the two are not directly comparable. And by the way, Edwards did this while he was a presidential candidate. Trump, this was 2006 when he was a celebrity businessman, but of course the business about the cover-up, alleged cover-up, is now. So the new thing here is that Cohen testified that he was going to reimburse the Enquirer for the $125,000, he says, for the McDougal payment, but with a bogus fee for advisory services. So I must say, it doesn't, when you get into the dirty details, it doesn't sound like a news operation. It sounds like a bunch of people doing Donald Trump's bidding.
Yeah, catch and kill is what it's called, right? Where you pay for a story to kill the story.
Yeah, but that practice in the tabloid world didn't originate with Donald Trump.
Yeah, no, it didn't. It didn't. But the issue here, of course, is that this could be a campaign finance violation because if the story had come out, it would have inevitably influenced the voters' decision on whether or not to support Donald Trump, or at least some of the voters' decisions, maybe. But at the same time, this is a very hard thing to prove, and I think that's, is this illegal? Is this legal? That is what's hard to prove. But the optics look terrible. I mean, this is the President of the United States who, as a candidate, had his cronies paying off tabloids to kill stories that would have negatively influenced him.
All right, we can debate the legal implications endlessly, but I think the optics look terrible is a fair summary at this point. Adrian Elrod, Jim Garrity, great to see you this Sunday. After the break, one of America's most influential conservative publications, The Weekly Standard, is shutting down, and one of its founders calls it an act of politico-cultural murder. That's next. The Weekly Standard is apparently abruptly shutting down, I should say, 23 years after it was launched by Bill Kristol and Fred Barnes and became a highly influential conservative magazine. The current editor-in-chief, Fox News contributor Steve Hayes, got the word Friday along with the rest of his staff. And Emily Jashinsky is back with us. So the parent company, which also owns the Washington Examiner, controlled by billionaire Phil Anschutz, says it was a business decision. Circulation kept going down. But let's put some of the Standard covers up on the screen. Bill Kristol is a very well-known never-Trumper. Steve Hayes, a frequent critic of President Trump, and it was perceived as an anti-Trump magazine. How much did that hurt among its conservative readership?
I think probably very little in the scheme of why it's shut down. I think that would be an easy narrative, but I don't think it had much to do with the business decision, which I think was a business decision, to shutter the Weekly Standard. And I think that's been echoed by people like David Brooks, by people like John Podhoretz, who have been mourning their wonderful publication over the past couple of
both of
days.
you who used to work there, yeah.
I do think, though, that conservatives, I think a lot of conservatives, not all conservatives, took issue with its coverage of the president. I don't think that necessarily ended the magazine.
Well, it's a tough time for all print magazines,
Yes.
but circulation was down 10% in the first year of Trump. I think it counted for a bit more than you were saying. And another person who apparently agrees is President Trump, because he tweeted this morning, or it was yesterday, I believe, the pathetic and dishonest Weekly Standard, run by failed prognosticator Bill Kristol, is flat broke and out of business. Too bad. Some conservatives didn't like that he was sort of dancing on the grave of this publication.
I didn't like it. I didn't like anybody dancing on the grave of this publication.
About 35 people losing their jobs.
People losing their jobs. And I'm choosing to use this time as a moment to mourn and remember, really remember, some of the incredible and beautiful journalism that the Weekly Standard has produced over the past 2 decades. I have had a lot of problems with its coverage over the past couple of years. I don't think it ever really understood Trump, and that's fine, but it was still producing, till its last breath, some really beautiful work.
Well, John Podhoretz, who you mentioned, one of the founding editors when it was launched in 1995, financed then by Rupert Murdoch, he calls it an intellectual and political crime to murder the Standard because he says, and I haven't seen this substantially rebutted, that Ansha shut down efforts to sell the magazine despite some interest from some outside buyers. It was done pretty coldly. Staffers given until 5 o'clock Friday to clean out their desks.
And quickly, and after allegedly there were buyers who wanted the Standard, and I don't know anything behind the scenes there. Sure. I do know that they're revamping the Washington Examiner, where I used to work. A lot of wonderful people there. They're revamping that magazine, and so you can see as a business decision, they own the Weekly Standard. It's tough, it's sad, but you can see where they would be able to justify that to grow their list for the new magazine they're launching. It's sad to see the Weekly Standard go no matter what.
I agree with that. And when it launched in the 90s, I mean, occasionally took on Newt Gingrich when he was the powerful House Speaker. It was, under Kristol, a big booster of the Iraq War. That, of course, was controversial. Published some big conservative intellectual names over the years. But I always felt the website was kind of an afterthought. There just wasn't that much content there. It didn't move very quickly. So and the bottom line is it's tough to compete in the Trump era if you're conservative and not on the Trump train, and also in the digital era.
So I disagree with that to an extent. I think there is a pretty big market for conservatism that's skeptical of Trump when warranted and supportive of Trump when warranted. I don't know that the Standard always nailed that.
Yeah. National Review criticizes the president.
And the Washington Examiner's editorial side does a great job of it. Of course, I think at the Federalist we do an excellent job of it, and I encourage people who are looking for fair criticism or support of the president whenever it's warranted to check out those outlets. So I do think there's a market for it. I think the Standard may have struggled to move into this era, but at the same time, it's sad to see it go, no matter what.
I hate to see any publication go under, and there's been some praise from the left. People didn't agree with this, but thought it was a good magazine. Emily Jasinski, great to see you.
Sorry.
So to come, Mika Brzezinski's apology for a slur against Mike Pompeo and the sliming of a college football star. I'm calling foul on this one. Mika Brzezinski really stepped in it on MSNBC's Morning Joe. She was talking about a Fox and Friends interview with Mike Pompeo, which she and her husband Joe praised, by the way, when she went off on the Secretary of State for his answers about the Jamal Khashoggi killing. A warning, there's some rough language here.
But why doesn't Mike Pompeo care right now? Are the pathetic deflections that we just heard when he appeared on Fox and Friends, is that a patriot speaking or a wannabe dictator's butt boy?
Well, that was pretty awful. It's an anti-gay slur. Mika quickly apologized on Twitter for her super bad choice of words, but the president, a one-time friend of theirs, who's hammered on that show every day, didn't let it pass. If it was a conservative that said what crazed Mika Brzezinski stated on her show yesterday using a certain horrible term, that person would be banned permanently from television. Then came these on-air comments from the daughter of President Carter's late national security advisor.
The term is crass and offensive, and I apologize to everyone, especially the LGBTQ community, and to my colleagues for using it. It was a mistake. My father would have found it so unbecoming and disrespectful, and he would have told me. I will work hard to be better, but I just wanted to say on camera, looking the viewers straight in the eye, I am really, really sorry.
It was a big mistake, and yes, it would have been better if she'd included Pompeo in her remarks, but that full-throated apology by Mika Brzezinski was the right thing to do, and I believe she didn't really consider the implications of that rather gross phrase. All right, I'm throwing the penalty flag on this one. Just hours after Oklahoma quarterback Kyler Murray won college football's Heisman Trophy, the highest honor in the sport, USA Today decided to ruin his celebration. The paper dug up some homophobic tweets used to insult his friends when he was 14 and 15 years old. Now, no one's defending the anti-gay slurs, and Murray apologized for his poor choice of words. But he was a teenager. This was way out of bounds. A mean-spirited case of gotcha journalism. This is exactly why people hate the media. It's a big celebration, the biggest day of his life, and that becomes a story. It gets picked up everywhere, and it really made me ill. Well, that's it for this edition of Media Buzz. I'm Howard Kurtz. Thanks for watching. Hey, hopefully you'll check out my new podcast. It's called Media Buzz Meter. There we see it. We kick around the day's 5 most interesting or important or buzzy stories. And you can subscribe at Apple iTunes or Google Play or TuneIn or FoxNewsPodcast.com. And we hope you like our Facebook page. We post my daily columns there and original videos, original content. Everything's moving to the net, right? Continue our conversation on Twitter at Howard Kurtz. We had a lot of interesting discussion today about the coverage of these investigations and the women, the way President Michael Cohen portrayed in the media choosing up sides. And I'd love to hear from you. We will be back here next Sunday morning. We'll see you then, 11 Eastern, with the latest buzz.